The morning sun cast long shadows across the town square of Millbrook, Arizona, painting the bronze statue of founder Elijah Crawford in golden light. Tourists snapped photos, children played on the grass, and no one noticed the message written in blood at the base of the monument. No one, except the lone biker who had stopped to stretch his legs. What he discovered would tear this quiet town apart and expose a darkness that powerful people had spent decades trying to hide. But no one imagined what would come next. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more stories of mystery and justice to those who need them. Jake Shadow Garrett had been riding for 3 days straight, putting miles between himself and the ghosts that haunted him in Nevada. At 52 years old, he had seen enough of the world to know that running from your problems never solved them. But sometimes a man needed the wind in his face and the rumble of a Harley beneath him to clear his head. His wife Maria had passed 2 years ago, cancer taking her slowly while he watched helplessly, and the emptiness she left behind had never quite filled in. The open road was the only medicine that helped, even if the relief was temporary. Jake was a member of the Hells Angels, Nevada chapter, had been for 30 years. The club was his family now. The brothers who had stood beside him at Maria's funeral, who had checked on him every week since, who understood that grief didn't follow a schedule. He had told them he needed some time alone, and they had respected that, knowing he would return when he was ready. Millbrook appeared on the highway like a postcard from a simpler time. Population 8,400, according to the faded sign at the city limits. Tree-lined streets, a quaint downtown square, and the kind of peaceful atmosphere that made travelers think about settling down. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happened, or so the brochures would have you believe. Jake had no intention of staying longer than it took to gas up and grab breakfast, but something about the town square caught his eye as he rumbled past on his gleaming black Harley-Davidson. The statue of Elijah Crawford stood in the center of a small park, surrounded by wooden benches and flower beds maintained by what was clearly a devoted garden club. Crawford had founded Millbrook in 1892, according to the brass plaque, and the grateful townspeople had erected this monument in 1952 to honor his legacy. It was the kind of thing you found in 1,000 small American towns. A bronze man, frozen in a heroic pose, pigeons gathering at his feet, locals walking past without a second glance. Jake pulled his bike to the curb and killed the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening after hours of highway noise. His back was aching from the long ride, and the coffee shop across the street looked promising, a little place called Rosie's, with a hand-painted sign and the smell of fresh biscuits wafting through the open door. But as he swung off his Harley and removed his helmet, his eyes were drawn back to the statue. Something wasn't right. Something tugged at his instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive through bar fights and prison stints and all the hard miles of his hard life. He crossed the grass slowly, his worn boots leaving prints in the morning dew. A handful of people were scattered around the square, a young mother pushing a stroller, 2 elderly men on a bench arguing about politics, a group of teenagers taking selfies near the fountain, a businessman hurrying toward the bank with a briefcase clutched under his arm. None of them were paying attention to the statue's base. None of them had noticed what Jake was now seeing clearly as he approached. The letters were small, maybe 4 inches tall, painted on the granite pedestal in a substance that was unmistakably blood, still wet, still glistening in the early morning light like something alive and terrible. SOS. Jake's stomach dropped. He had seen blood before, more than most people thanks to a life that hadn't always been gentle, and he knew fresh blood when he saw it. This hadn't been here long, maybe an hour, maybe less. Someone had crept to this statue in the dark or the early dawn and left this desperate message, hoping someone would see it, hoping someone would understand. He looked around the square, searching for anyone who seemed injured, anyone who might have left this desperate cry for help. But the people around him continued their peaceful morning routines, completely oblivious to the horror written just feet away from them. The mother cooed at her baby. The old men laughed at a shared joke. The teenagers posed for another photo with duck lips and peace signs. "Hey!" Jake called out, his voice cutting through the peaceful morning like a knife. "Someone come look at this, right now!" The mother with the stroller glanced up nervously, her smile fading at the urgency in his tone. The elderly men stopped their argument mid-sentence. The teenagers lowered their phones, looking annoyed at being interrupted. One by one, like a wave rippling outward from a stone dropped in still water, people began to drift toward the statue, curious about the commotion. Then they saw the blood, and everything changed. The first scream came from the mother with the stroller. She grabbed her baby and backed away so quickly she nearly tripped over the curb, her face white with pure terror. The elderly men rose from their bench, one of them pulling out a cell phone with shaking hands, while the other crossed himself and muttered a prayer. "Call 911!" someone shouted from across the square. "Don't touch it!" Another voice warned. "It's evidence!" "Oh my God, is that real blood? That's real blood!" Within minutes, the quiet town square had transformed into a scene of absolute chaos. More people arrived, drawn by the commotion and the screams, and the crowd swelled to 30, then 50, then more. Jake found himself at the center of a growing storm, people pushing past him to see the blood, then recoiling in horror when they did. Some were crying. Some were shouting into phones. Some just stood frozen, staring at those 3 bloody letters like they couldn't process what they were seeing. But it was the reactions of certain townspeople that caught Jake's attention, reactions that didn't fit the pattern of shock and fear. A man in an expensive grey suit pushed through the crowd, his face pale and his eyes wide with something that looked less like shock and more like recognition. He was followed by 2 other men, similarly dressed in the uniform of small-town power, who formed a protective semicircle around him as they approached the statue. "Everyone step back," the suited man commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "This is clearly a prank, someone's idea of a sick joke, nothing more. Let's not blow this out of proportion." "That's blood, Mayor Preston," an elderly woman said firmly, pushing forward with her arms crossed over her chest. "I was a nurse for 40 years at County General, and I know blood when I see it. That's fresh human blood, not paint, not ketchup, not some Halloween prop." Mayor Harold Preston's jaw tightened visibly, a muscle twitching near his temple. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair perfectly styled and a politician's practice smile that was now nowhere to be seen. "We don't know that for certain, Martha. It could be anything. Let's not start a panic over what is probably just some teenagers with a twisted sense of humor." He turned to one of his companions, lowering his voice. "But not enough. Get some water and clean this up before anyone else sees it. And where the hell is Dean?" "Wait just a minute." Jake's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. People turned to look at him. This stranger in a leather vest with Hell's Angels patches, tattoos covering his arms, road dust on his boots. "You want to destroy evidence? Before the police even get here?" Preston's eyes locked onto Jake, taking in every detail of his appearance, calculating, assessing. "And who exactly are you?" "I don't recognize you from around here. Just a traveler passing through, but I know enough to know you don't wash away a crime scene." Jake stepped closer to the mayor, his voice dropping to a growl that only Preston and his men could hear. "Unless you've got a reason to want it gone, unless you already know what this is about." "Dry." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Preston's face flushed an angry red, and his companions moved slightly forward, their hands curling into fists. For a moment, Jake thought they might actually try something, but then the wail of sirens split the morning air. 2 police cars screeched to a halt at the edge of the square, lights flashing, and 4 officers emerged with hands on their weapons. The crowd parted like the Red Sea to let them through, and Jake watched carefully as the lead officer, a graying man with a sheriff's badge and the weathered face of someone who had seen his share of trouble, took in the scene with an expression that was deliberately carefully blank. "What do we have here?" Sheriff Dean Watkins asked, his voice calm despite the chaos swirling around him. "Someone wrote SOS in blood on the statue," Jake said, pointing. "I found it about 10 minutes ago. Haven't touched anything, and I've been making sure nobody else does either." Watkins looked at the message for a long moment, then at Jake, then at Mayor Preston, who was hovering nearby with barely concealed anxiety. Something passed between the sheriff and the mayor. A look, a understanding, a silent communication that spoke of years of shared secrets. "Harold, you want to tell me what's going on here?" "Nothing's going on," Preston said quickly, too quickly. "This is obviously a prank. Some teenagers with too much time on their hands trying to cause trouble." "Teenagers who happen to have access to fresh human blood?" Jake asked. "That's quite a prank. Most kids I know stick to toilet paper and eggs." Sheriff Watkins studied Jake for a long moment, his eyes hard and calculating. "You said you're just passing through?" "That's right." "Then I suggest you continue on your way, friend. We'll handle this. This is Millbrook business, and we take care of our own problems." Something in the sheriff's tone made Jake's instincts scream a warning. It wasn't the voice of a lawman, determined to solve a crime. It was the voice of a man who wanted a problem to disappear as quickly and quietly as possible. "3 teenagers have gone missing from this town in the last 6 months, said a voice from the crowd. Jake turned to see a woman in her 40s pushing forward, her face set with fierce determination despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "My niece Lily was one of them. She vanished 8 weeks ago, and nobody has done a damn thing about it." The woman's accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, freezing everyone in place. Jake watched as uncomfortable glances were exchanged throughout the crowd, neighbors looking at neighbors, friends looking away from friends. This wasn't news to these people. They knew about the missing teenagers. They had been living with this knowledge for months, and they had been keeping quiet. "Mrs. Delgado, this really isn't the time or place," Mayor Preston began, his voice carrying a warning edge that made Jake's hands curl into fists. "When is the time, Harold?" Elena Delgado demanded, stepping forward until she was face to face with the mayor. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but in that moment she seemed to tower over everyone around her. "When another child disappears, when someone else writes a message in their own blood begging for help." She pointed at the statue, her hand trembling with emotion. "That could be Lily, that could be any of those missing kids. And you want to wash it away like it never happened?" The crowd murmured, sides forming, tension building like pressure in a sealed container. Jake watched it all unfold, his mind racing to piece together what he was seeing. 3 missing teenagers, a message in blood, a mayor and sheriff who wanted it covered up, and a town full of people who seemed afraid to speak. "The investigation into the missing persons is ongoing," Sheriff Watkins said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're doing everything we can." "You're doing nothing!" Elena shouted. "You told me Lily ran away!" "A 14-year-old girl with no money, no phone, no clothes, except what she was wearing. And you said she just decided to leave. What kind of investigation is that?" A murmur of support rippled through part of the crowd. Not everyone. Jake noticed that some people were deliberately avoiding Elena's eyes, shifting away from her, as if her grief was contagious. But others were nodding, their faces showing the same frustration and fear. "I've been saying it for months," called out a man in work clothes, probably in his 50s. "My boy Tommy disappeared in January. 17 years old, never been in trouble, worked at the hardware store after school. You people said he ran off to California, but Tommy loved this town. He never would have left without telling me." "And Sarah Chen," added an Asian woman near the back of the crowd, her voice breaking. 15 years old, disappeared in March. The sheriff said she probably went to find her biological parents, but Sarah was adopted as a baby. She never knew her biological parents, never wanted to find them. That story never made sense. 3 teenagers, 3 families, 3 lies told by the authorities to make the problem go away. Jake felt a cold certainty settling in his gut. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't runaways. Something terrible was happening in Millbrook, and the people in charge were either complicit or covering it up. Sheriff Watkins raised his hands, trying to regain control of the situation. "Folks, I understand emotions are running high, but this isn't helping anyone. Let's let the forensics team do their job, and we'll get to the bottom of this message. I promise you, if there's any connection to the missing persons cases, we'll find it." "Like you found anything in the past 6 months?" Elena shot back. "Like you found any evidence, any leads, any reason to keep looking?" "Mrs. Delgado, I'm going to have to ask you to step back. You're interfering with an active investigation." Jake had heard enough. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Eleanor and the sheriff, his broad shoulders forming a barrier that made Watkins take an involuntary step backward. "The lady asked a fair question," Jake said quietly. 3 kids missing in 6 months is a pattern. A message in blood is a cry for help. And the first thing your mayor wanted to do was wash away the evidence." He met Watkins' eyes. "I've seen a lot of towns with secrets, Sheriff, and I've learned that the people working hardest to keep those secrets buried are usually the ones who created them in the first place." Watkins' face went hard as stone. "That sounds like an accusation, friend. Take it however you want. I'm just an observer." Jake turned to Elena. "Mrs. Delgado, I'd like to hear more about your niece. And about the other missing kids. Somewhere private, away from people who might not want that story told." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and Jake saw hope flicker in her exhausted eyes. "The coffee shop across the street," she said. "Rosie's. I'll meet you there in 10 minutes. Jake nodded and turned away from the sheriff, feeling Watkins's eyes burning into his back as he walked. Behind him, he could hear Preston demanding answers and Watkins trying to restore order, their voices tight with barely concealed panic. Good, Jake thought. Let them panic. Let them wonder what he knew and what he was planning. Because Jake Garrett had just made a decision. He wasn't passing through Millbrook anymore. He was staying until he found out what happened to those kids, and he was going to call in every brother he had to help him do it. His phone was already in his hand as he pushed through the door of Rosie's coffee shop. The number he dialed was answered on the second ring. "Hammer, it's Shadow. I need you to round up the boys. All of them. There's a town in Arizona that needs some attention." The coffee at Rosie's was strong and bitter, exactly what Jake needed as he listened to Elena Delgado pour out 6 months of grief, frustration, and suspicion. The small shop was nearly empty. Just an elderly couple in the corner sharing a slice of pie and a waitress who kept her distance, sensing the intensity of their conversation and knowing better than to interrupt whatever was unfolding at that corner booth. "Lily was the third to disappear," Elena said, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched since it arrived, the steam long since faded into nothing. "Tommy Martinez went first back in January. 17 years old, worked at the hardware store after school, never missed a single day in 3 years. Then Sarah Chen in March. 15, quiet girl, brilliant student, wanted to be a veterinarian someday. Lily in April." She paused, her voice catching on the name. "All between 14 and 17. All from working-class families. All supposedly runaways who just decided to leave everything behind without a word." "Oh, but you don't believe that," Jake said. It wasn't a question. Nobody with half a brain believes it. But the families who speak up get shut down fast. Elena's eyes hardened with an anger that had been building for months without release. Tommy's father started asking questions, going to town council meetings, demanding answers. 2 weeks later, he lost his job at the Preston lumber mill, 23 years of loyal service, and suddenly they didn't need him anymore. Sarah's parents were immigrants. They've been American citizens for 20 years, built a life here, raised their daughter right. Someone reported them to ICE anyway. Anonymous tip. They stopped talking real fast after that. Jake's jaw tightened. "And you?" "I'm a teacher at the middle school. Was, I should say. Got put on administrative leave last month for creating a hostile work environment." She laughed bitterly, the sound carrying no humor at all. Apparently, asking why nobody's looking for my missing niece makes the other teachers uncomfortable, makes the principal uncomfortable, makes everybody in this whole damn town uncomfortable because they'd rather pretend everything is fine. Through the window, Jake could see the forensics team still working around the statue, yellow crime scene tape fluttering in the afternoon breeze. Sheriff Watkins was conferring with Mayor Preston near one of the patrol cars, their heads close together, their expressions grim and guarded. "Tell me about the night Lily disappeared. Everything you remember." Elena closed her eyes, the memory clearly painful even after all these weeks. It was a Thursday, April 15th. Lily went to the library after school. She always did, ever since she was little. That girl loved to read more than anything. The library closes at 7. She should have been home by 7:15 at the latest. Her voice cracked. By 8, I was calling her friends. By 9, I was at the sheriff's station begging them to help. What did they tell you? To wait. To give her time. Teenagers run off sometimes, they said. She'll come back when she's ready, they said. Elena's hands clenched around the mug so hard, her knuckles went white. Like I didn't know my own niece. Like I couldn't tell the difference between a rebellious teenager and a child who would never, ever leave without telling me first. Did anyone see anything that night? Mrs. Patterson on Oak Street told me she saw a black van that night, parked on the corner with its lights off, engine running. But when the sheriff interviewed her officially, she suddenly couldn't remember seeing anything at all. Said she must have been confused, must have been thinking of a different night. Jake felt the cold certainty settling deeper. Someone got to her. Someone gets to everyone in this town. That's how it works here, how it's always worked. Elena's voice was heavy with resignation and rage. The Prestons and Watkins have been running Millbrook for 4 generations. They own the bank, the biggest businesses, half the rental properties. Cross them, and your life gets very difficult very fast. Everyone knows it. Everyone accepts it. The coffee shop door opened, and both of them tensed. A young woman in her 20s entered, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing the grease-stained uniform of someone who worked at the diner down the street. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale and clearly terrified. But she walked straight to their table anyway. "Mrs. Delgado, I heard what happened at the square." She glanced nervously at Jake, taking in the leather vest, the patches, the hard eyes. "I need to tell you something. About Lily. About all of them." Carmen Reyes was shaking so badly that her coffee cup rattled against the saucer when she tried to lift it. Jake studied her carefully. The nervous eyes that kept darting to the door every few seconds, the way she flinched at every sound from outside, the tremor in her hands she couldn't control no matter how hard she tried. "I should have said something before," Carmen whispered, her voice barely audible. "Months ago, when it first happened. But I was scared. I'm still scared. My family is here, my little brothers are here, and I know what happens to people who talk in this town." She took a shaky breath. But that message in blood. Someone is desperate. Someone is begging for help with everything they have. I can't stay quiet anymore. I can't live with myself if I don't say something. "What do you know, Carmen?" Elena asked, reaching across the table to take the young woman's trembling hand. Carmen looked around the coffee shop one more time, making absolutely sure no one was close enough to overhear. Then she leaned in, her voice dropping even lower. "I work the late shift at the Riverside Motel on Highway 12. Not a nice place. Truckers, people passing through, sometimes people who don't want to be seen. About a week after Lily disappeared around 2 in the morning, I saw something. A black van with no license plates was parked behind the motel, near the storage buildings. There was a man loading something into it, something wrapped in blankets, something that was moving, something the size of a person." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Did you recognize the man?" Jake asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in his chest. Carmen hesitated, fear warring with conscience across her face. "It was dark. I can't say for sure, not in a court of law, but he looked like Deputy Wilson, the sheriff's nephew. I've seen him around town my whole life. I know how he walks, how he holds himself. When he saw me watching from the office window, he just stared." Didn't say anything, didn't move, just stared at me until I backed away and closed the blinds. The next morning, the van was gone, like it had never been there. Did you ever see it again? Twice more, both times late at night, both times at the motel. And both times, Deputy Wilson's patrol car was parked nearby, like he was standing guard or something. Carmen wiped tears from her eyes with a trembling hand. I think something terrible is happening, and I think the people who are supposed to protect us are part of it. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and read the text from Hammer. 43 brothers rolling out tonight. Highway 40 to Millbrook, be there by dawn. Just say the word, brother. He typed back without hesitation. Word given, bring everyone. The door of the coffee shop opened, and this time it was Sheriff Watkins himself who stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room with cold efficiency until they found Jake's table, and his expression darkened considerably when he saw the three of them huddled together. Mr. Garrett, I thought I made it clear that you should move along. Jake stood slowly, deliberately positioning himself between the sheriff and the two women. Changed my plans. Nice town you got here, Sheriff. Thought I'd stay a while, see the sights, meet the locals. That wouldn't be wise. Probably not. I've never been accused of being wise. Jake smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold promise of a man who had faced down worse threats. Tell me, Sheriff, what did the forensics team find? That blood belong to anyone in particular? Watkins's face went carefully blank. That's an ongoing investigation. I'm not at liberty to discuss it. Just like the investigation into those missing kids, 6 months without a single lead? Jake stepped closer, lowering his voice. Here's what I know. 3 teenagers missing. Someone wrote SOS in their own blood begging for help. Your nephew was seen loading something human-sized into an unmarked van a week after the last disappearance. Those facts add up to something ugly, Sheriff. Watkins's composure cracked for just a moment, fear flickering in his eyes like lightning before disappearing. You're making accusations you can't support. Not yet, but I've got friends coming, lots of them, and we're very good at finding things people want hidden. Jake walked past the sheriff into the afternoon sun, feeling Watkins's eyes burning into his back with every step. They came at dawn, 43 motorcycles roaring into Millbrook like thunder announcing a storm that had been building for months. The townspeople emerged from their houses in bathrobes and slippers, staring in disbelief as the convoy of leather and chrome rolled down Main Street and parked in perfect formation around the town square, engines idling like the growl of predators. Jake met Hammer at the front of the column, clasping his brother's hand. Thanks for coming. Who family doesn't need thanks? Hammer surveyed the town with cold, calculating eyes. This the place with the missing kids? This is it, and I think I know where they're keeping them. Carmen's information had led Jake to do some digging overnight, using contacts built over 30 years. Property records showed the old Crawford mine, abandoned since the 1950s, but still owned by the Preston family, had seen unusual activity. Recent purchases of generator fuel, building supplies, portable toilets, strange expenses for a mine that hadn't operated in 70 years. Even stranger when the purchases traced to a shell company owned by Deputy Wilson's brother-in-law. By noon, Jake and 20 brothers stood at the mine entrance, a rusted gate fitted with a brand-new padlock. Sheriff Watkins and his deputies formed a nervous perimeter behind them, hands on weapons, but clearly unwilling to start something they couldn't finish. "You can't go in there," Watkins insisted. "Private property. It's dangerous." "Then arrest us," Hammer said calmly. "But know this. Everything happening here is being streamed live to 50,000 viewers, and growing every minute." He pointed to the prospect with a phone mounted on his helmet. "Whatever's in that mine, the whole world is about to see it." They found them 200 feet underground, 3 teenagers, thin and frightened but alive, locked in a makeshift cell. Lily Delgado, her arm bandaged where she had cut herself to write the message. Tommy Martinez, missing the longest, his eyes hollow but defiant. Sarah Chen, who started sobbing the moment she saw the bikers coming through the darkness with flashlights blazing. The truth came out over the following days. Deputy Wilson had been running a trafficking operation, using the mine as a holding facility until buyers could be arranged. Sheriff Watkins had discovered it months ago, but instead of stopping it, he had helped cover it up for payments. Mayor Preston had known and chosen silence to protect his family's reputation. It was Lily who had escaped long enough to write the message. She had saved a piece of broken glass for weeks, cut her own arm, and crawled through a ventilation shaft to the statue in pre-dawn darkness. She wrote her cry for help before Wilson found her and dragged her back. She had been praying someone would notice. Someone did. The arrests made national news. Deputy Wilson, Sheriff Watkins, and 6 others were taken by the FBI. Mayor Preston resigned and was charged as an accessory. The Hells Angels were interviewed on every network, transformed from outlaws to heroes. But for Jake, the only moment that mattered was seeing Elena run across the hospital parking lot and collapse into Lily's arms, both sobbing with relief that words couldn't capture. "Thank you," Elena whispered later. "You saved her." Jake shook his head. Lily saved herself. She was brave enough to ask for help when no one was listening. "I just made sure someone answered." He rode out of Millbrook the next morning, brothers flanking him on either side. Behind him, a town was beginning to heal. Ahead, the open road stretched toward the horizon. Maria was still gone. That emptiness would never fully heal. But for the first time in 2 years, Jake felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. Some people said the Hells Angels were criminals to be feared, but Jake knew a different truth. They were brothers, protectors. When someone wrote SOS in their own blood, begging for help from a world that had abandoned them, the angels answered. That was what family meant. That was what it would always mean.